You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Billy Ball is editor of North Carolina's Cardinal Pine. It's an independent and important news organization in that state. Its mission includes getting good information to people who, they don't pay for subscriptions, so they're vulnerable to fake news. Billy, thank you for joining me. And first and foremost, I hope you and your family came through this storm okay.
Thank you so much, Edwin. I'm really happy to be here. And for what it's worth, I'm out of central North Carolina. We got off pretty lucky considering how things turned out in western North Carolina. So we're all good. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, well, I'm glad. But the state has suffered, I think, more than we may yet know. What are you seeing on the ground?
So let me just say that I'm not personally out on the ground there in western North Carolina, but one of our team members is. But here's what I understand is happening from reporters I trust who are also there and from folks who are on the ground. The situation is heartbreaking, and I don't think there's any other way to put it. This is an area of North Carolina that is not accustomed to hurricane damage, and you can't be more clear about that. Where I'm from in eastern North Carolina, they get hurricane damage all the time because we're on the coast. So it's unusual for a storm like this to come in and do this kind of damage inland. But this was kind of they talk about a perfect storm. This was a perfect storm for western North Carolina because it is an area that is very rugged. It has hills and valleys. It has a lot of rivers that are key waterways in that area. And those rivers were heavily swollen already. They'd received a record amount of rain in the days before the storm even got there. So it was shaping up for this worst case scenario with the flooding and the mudslides, and it's just heartbreaking. We haven't found all the folks that we've lost out there, but for the people who are surviving, I think it's probably a very sad situation. It's probably a frustrating situation because it's also really hard to reach people. The roads were heavily damaged. So you got people out there trying to clear roads as quickly as possible to get crucial things to people who need it right now. So, like I said, it's just heartbreaking.
So we have the roads that are still impassable, and I understand power is still out in places. Water is a problem in places. I'm sure it's hard to get food into places. This is really, every day that goes by it makes it more dire.
It's of all the things that I know are the most desperate, I know water is maybe the biggest one. Just getting potable water to people right now is a desperate situation. As we mentioned, it's made worse by the damage to the roads, because I mentioned those mudslides, the flooding. These are areas that, quite frankly, can be tricky to get to even in the best weather. They are winding in and out of mountains, and it's beautiful, but it can be a little bit tricky to get cars and a lot of vehicles through there anyway. And this is the opposite of the best of circumstances. So it's just, getting it to people who desperately need it. And what we're seeing out here is an incredible, we've seen the response from the state and federal government. We're also seeing an incredible response just from neighbors helping neighbors. And we shared a video at Cardinal Pine of folks delivering insulin on the backs of mules up a mountain in Black Mountain. They're doing anything they can to help their neighbors. And if not for all the misinformation from Donald Trump and his folks, it might be the most positive story, the most positive lining that you could imagine out of this terrible tragedy. But of course, there's been a terrible amount of misinformation that's out there as well about the situation.
So let's talk about that, because Mr. Trump and Elon Musk, they've tried to characterize the federal response and the President Biden's response in ways I don't actually want to repeat. And others, Republicans in Congress, are saying that we gave away the FEMA money to house immigrants. I mean, those weren't exactly the words. I'm not going to use their words. They were too vile. What are the facts about the federal response, the coordination of that response between the various governments, the federal government and the local governments, and the adequacy of funding?
One thing I want to acknowledge first is that for people who are there experiencing it and waiting for water and waiting for food, the response when people can't get to you up a road, it probably feels, impossibly slow. But one thing that I've seen and that we've reported on and that our reporter out there has noted as well, is there was a tremendous amount of speed and dedication from the folks who are out there working. So the Governor Roy Cooper, in advance, we knew this was shaping up to be a really bad situation because of that rain in advance in western North Carolina that I mentioned before. They knew that this was kind of the worst case scenario. So they were in communication with the White House and the federal government about this ahead of time. The President Biden got a disaster declaration out on Saturday, some hours after the storm had moved out of North Carolina, and we were getting a sense of how bad it was. So they got that, and that was an important procedural step to declare it a disaster. That got FEMA folks moving in. So at that point, we started seeing the state and federal government and local governments and local law enforcement were working together to try to get supplies to people and to try to help people. And so people were out there working, and I acknowledge that if you're on the ground and it's taken some hours and people can't get through the roads, that it probably feels like too long, but it's also, there's a tremendous effort that's happening out there. People working around the clock. Our transportation leader here in North Carolina talked about how his employees had to come from across the state, and they set up a temporary headquarters for them to live in the area to work around the clock just to get those roads cleared. Because that was the most important thing, was getting the roads clear so you can get water up there, so you can get food, so you can get healthcare supplies. So, there's obviously a tremendous amount of work that was going on. And what we're seeing out of Elon Musk and Donald Trump and some of these people on the internet who don't even look like real people, they look like bots, is just, telling people that nothing is happening, that the federal government's not here, or telling people that FEMA's not doing anything, or trying to actually even stop help. It's frankly madness, and it's for people who are on the ground there. I think we've seen reporters, we've seen local elected officials who are Republicans, by the way, who might in other circumstances be supportive of Donald Trump, who are saying, please stop this misinformation. Please stop sharing this bogus stuff. People's lives are on the line, and we're working to save them. And, Edwin, we can't say a fraction of the misinformation people are sharing out there, because we don't want to give it wings. We don't want to breathe more air into these lies. But they're madness, and they're cruel, and it's all obviously an attempt from Donald Trump's campaign to try to boost himself. And when I said this in a column I recently wrote, you would think people would give it a break, give it a rest on this sort of stuff if people are dying or if they're missing. And we didn't get much time in North Carolina before that sort of partisan hackery sort of swarmed in on us. And I think there's an incredible amount of frustration and sadness from people who are out there, but also frustration that politicians like Donald Trump and his allies are lying about this. Yeah.
I mean, this is the biggest, I guess, storm damage since Katrina. And I remember Katrina, and, it took the National Guard didn't show up with water for anybody for days. The response truly was appalling and slow. And I think the government's learned from that, and the coordination's better, and the response is phenomenal, but it's hard work and difficult. And Katrina, for gosh sakes, was in a city that still had an airport, wasn't in the mountains in a rural place harder to get to.
Absolutely. And people out in this area, I can't stress this enough, are living pretty remote lives out there.
Yep.
You go up a road and you might pass, 4 or 5 houses for miles, and you're trying to reach people who are up on a steep incline in terrible weather circumstances with a road that isn't functional. It's a worst case scenario, and it's difficult and hard, but it certainly isn't made better by politicians lying about it to boost their election chances. I mean, we've seen the National Guard here for days has been airlifting hundreds of thousands of pounds of supplies in and out of these areas, and it's just, and then you get into all the ridiculousness of Trump's claims that Democrats are not acting because these are red areas. You know, the hardest hit area in western North Carolina was Asheville and Buncombe County, which is one of the bluest spots in North Carolina. It doesn't even make sense what he's saying, and so it's frustrating.
Let's turn to the politics then. Let's just turn to politics. This terrible disaster is being met with a coordinated and competent response that because of the scope of the disaster is still terribly painful for people. But the response is coordinated, competent, timely, and then you have bad actors lying about it in ways that make it harder to provide aid. I know they think that lying is going to help them in North Carolina, but is it going to help them, or is it hurting Donald Trump because people on the ground know?
I can't see how it's really going to help him in the end, because like I said, those Republican elected officials who might otherwise be on this guy's side, I don't know what they're thinking in this moment, but we've seen them on social media saying, please stop spreading these lies. I just can't imagine that in the end, lying about this stuff is going to help him there. I'm sure there will be people maybe who are not in the center of it, and maybe people who feel like it has taken too long to get them help. And again, I have empathy for them, because it is so difficult when you're sitting there and you're waiting for help, and you need water and you need medical supplies and food. I have empathy for them, and it makes me sad that I would be very sad to imagine that these people who are hard to communicate with right now, if they get online and they see that Donald Trump's saying that nobody's coming to help them, how desperate that feels, and it's a flat out lie. And there are people, there was a quote from Governor Roy Cooper during his press conference the other day. He said, no matter who or where you are in western North Carolina, we're coming to help you. We are on our way. And we're seeing people who are noticing that. We're seeing journalists who are chest deep in water, who are photographing and documenting this stuff. And it's just a shame that people would use it to try to help their electoral chances. And one thing that I want to add as well, if I may, Edwin, is that, as I mentioned before, it's normally eastern North Carolina and the coast that gets hit really hard with hurricanes. So we've had a lot of experience with hurricanes. And, Hurricane Matthew a few years ago did an incredible amount of damage in eastern North Carolina, flooded areas of the state. It shut down schools, an incredible amount of damage. And I think it's important to point out that I don't know that Trump saying that the federal government is not doing enough is really going to fly in these areas, because we can't forget that after Hurricane Matthew, Donald Trump was president, and he denied North Carolina 99% of the amount of federal aid that was requested by Governor Roy Cooper. And you can go back and find those stories. It was a few $1 million he sent our way with these poor, mostly, and I have to say, rural, mostly black communities that were underwater in eastern North Carolina after Hurricane Matthew. And people are going to say, you weren't there for North Carolina when you were president. And how are we going to buy this idea that you're the avenging hero now when this is happening? And I think I don't think it's going to work, Edwin. I don't think, and people who've been through it, who saw no support from Trump when he was president, I don't think they're going to be fooled by this show.
Yeah. I read, and I don't know if this is true, so I read that there were, deep fakes of people on roofs, asking for help, that they need to be rescued. And then people would show up to rescue them, but there was no one there because it was a fake. And, to pulling resources where they don't need to go when they should be somewhere else. Is that stuff really happening?
We have seen a lot of, I haven't heard specifically about the story you're mentioning, Edwin, but I believe it because we've seen a lot of AI-generated bogus images. And some of them are, they are designed to, there was one that was going around that was of this little girl hugging a puppy, and she was like in a boat and she was crying. And my first reaction when I saw it, because I'm used to looking at misinformation, is this is designed to make people feel this big emotion and to share it. And it just was too fake. It was just like, this is too, it's too designed to get a reaction from us. And real life rarely looks exactly like that. So, I saw real journalists sharing it. It was a really, it was a pretty well done AI fake, but it was fake. And so we're seeing a lot of that stuff happening. And some of it has clear partisan reasons. It's to say that look, Joe Biden's left this little fake girl without any help and her puppy, and it's it's flat out wrong, and it's disturbing, and just it reminds me of, frankly, of the early days of the pandemic, which I think people have kind of blacked out a little bit, myself included. But in those early days when we were trying to get information about this thing that was killing people, Donald Trump was president, and there was an incredible amount of misinformation from him and the people around him about the virus that was, frankly, killing people. And so to me, I see parallels there. Like, this is what happened. Donald Trump has a history in tragedies and in disasters of not making the situation better. In fact, of exacerbating it, of trying to use a disaster for political gains. And anybody who was out in Puerto Rico when he delayed aid to Puerto Rico after a hurricane can tell you this as well. Like, this guy has no record of standing up for people when they are in their worst possible situation. He has a record of doing the opposite. And I think people are seeing that.
He's such a liar, Billy. I hear in my head, how he says about the war in Ukraine, it never would have happened if I was president. He's such a liar and such an egotist, and he, after all, did, as we know, change the path of a hurricane when he was in office. I'm sure he says to himself, if I was president, this hurricane wouldn't have happened. It's maddeningly delusional.
We had to do some misinformation debunking yesterday, and this sounds goofy. What I'm about to say sounds ridiculous. Like, we couldn't possibly have to do this in journalism, but we had to do some fact checking because Marjorie Taylor Greene and other folks were sharing this frankly insane idea that Democrats had some way of controlling the weather, that they were using some sort of machine in order to send a hurricane into red areas. I'm not kidding. Like, if your reaction is that's ludicrous and you're going to laugh at it, yeah, that's appropriate, but it has serious consequences. And we had to do a video yesterday at Cardinal Pine saying, listen, that doesn't exist. No one has a machine. When I get off here, I am going to go right on Cardinal on Pine's site and see that. They said, just to help me understand, Marjorie Taylor Greene and others said Democrats were controlling the weather in order to, make it harder for Republicans to vote by causing chaos? She has implied this before, and she was responding a couple of days ago. I think it was on X, which is the place where all the misinformation thrives. It thrives in a lot of places, but really Elon Musk has encouraged it there. And this idea was out there. We actually had to make a video and say, no, Democrats don't have a machine that controls the weather and sends hurricanes into Republican areas. And
oh my God. Was it a Jewish space
I can't
laser?
believe we had to fact check.
Was it one of her Jewish space lasers that she thinks they were using? And they're just mad.
It's wild. It's just wild. And our reporter was saying, hey, this is ringing a bell. And he actually found, because I love our reporter for having this in his memory. There was an old G.I. Joe cartoon in the 80s where the Cobra King Cobra commander was using a device just like that in D.C. And it was like, this is a cartoon, not a documentary.
Wow.
We have to say that. And this is, I can't believe we have to do this, but it's
thank goodness you're there. Thank goodness you're there and able to do it. Listen, in the little time we have left, how can people help? What can people, up here in the Great Lakes region, what can people who care do to help folks in Western North Carolina?
Here's what I would recommend: going to a credible news site in this state, whether it's NPR, whether it's News and Observer, Cardinal Pine. We have a list on our site as well. Here's how to get help, and here's how to help. These organizations, if you find a credible news organization, most of them have done it, and they have brought their paywalls down to their credit. Cardinal Pine will never have a paywall, but these folks, the for-profit folks, are also bringing down their paywalls, and they have lists up there of vetted organizations that you can contribute to that can help, whether it's the American Red Cross. North Carolina also has a disaster relief fund that you can contribute to that is going directly to the organizations bringing water and food and medical supplies there. You can donate money to them. And there are, like I said, a number of organizations on the ground that are getting food out there and water and supplies. And so, like I said, I would go check them out, the American Red Cross, find a list from a trusted news organization about the organizations that you can contribute to, because I think that's what you can do. And also you can stop spreading lies if you're a part of it. Let me say that too. If you're out there enabling misinformation, you've got to stop. Please stop. It's hurting people, and it's not helping anyone. And quite frankly, on the ground in Western North Carolina, there are people helping people, and none of them are asking, hey, are you a Republican or a Democrat before I help you? No one's doing that, because that's not how people act. And see this for what it is, which is a humanitarian crisis and not a political advantage for any one side or the other.
Yeah, and as you say, it's also having nothing to do with government, an example of humans helping each other that's beautiful.
It's, I wish that we had more time just to tell those stories about it. And we're going to tell more of those at Cardinal Pine, because that's the important thing. There's some lies that you can let sit there and you try not to give them air by even pushing back against them. But some were so big and so harmful that you have to fight them. And that's what we've had to do. And not just us, but a lot of news organizations have worked very hard to push back against this misinformation. And you have to give credit to the local officials. I don't care what the partisan affiliation is. There are people on the ground here in North Carolina who are doing the right thing and who are saying the right thing to try to help their community. And, clearly they're not on Donald Trump's speed dial, because I'm sure they would have a lot of things to say to him if they were.
Well, that's going to be our last word. Listen, thank you for taking the time. I know you're, I was going to say swamped, but that's terrible. There's a ton of work that has to be done, so I'm grateful that you take the time to share with us up here some of the things that you're seeing. And I'm speaking for all of the Great Lakes region. Our heart's with you and with the folks in Western North Carolina.
I'm always happy to be here, Edwin, and thank you to all our friends up there in the Midwest. We appreciate y'all.
All right. Take care.
Take care, Edwin. Bye now.